You coordinate the studios in Athens for the university. Which sites typically comprise the site visits?
In Athens we went to the Agora, the Parthenon, and then outside Athens it varied every studio, but typically we would bus down to the Peloponnese, and there we would go to I think Mycenae is the most common place we would stop initially, and then the sanctuary of Asclepius. Epidaurus was the cult of Asclepius, the god of healing, and so there's a whole complex there from basically ancient hotels through to sort of cultural centres and temples, some of which have been partially reconstructed so that you can get some sort of sense of the architecture.
So what kind of architectural discussions did those sites tend to bring about?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Not so much the architecture. What Calliope, my collaborator, would talk about is basically the ancient myths and how the sites are connected to the mythology. The one in Athens, the Acropolis, were taken there by the head of the Australian Archaeological Institute in Athens, and knows everything there is to know about the site. So he would give us more detail probably than the students could handle. Still pretty interesting, and because he had connections with the Greek archaeologists, we were able to actually go inside the Parthenon, which tourists aren't allowed to do, and actually get up inside the columns and touch the floor and sort of get some kind of direct kind of physical experience of the site. Take me for a walk through.
So, welcome to the Acropolis. First reactions?
The texturing is fantastic. We were talking earlier about the effect of age, and you can actually, it's been textured so that it looks like it's weathered over time. There's a few details which relate back to a later period than the construction of the temple. The shields on the facade were installed by Alexander the Great, so they weren't on the original. But otherwise it's pretty amazing, I'd have to say. Actually, the marble of the columns, for example, in the original temple, the columns were painted. They were plastered and painted, so that's not showing paint. Also, the Pentelic marble is incredibly white. It's one of the purest kind of marble. So what you're seeing here is actually not Pentelic marble at all.
It's been textured differently.
It's been made to look weathered. But ancient Athens didn't have cars, so you didn't get much atmospheric pollution, so it wouldn't look like that. And as I said, it was substantially painted. This is showing some paint, I think. The ancient Greeks loved to paint everything. So, for example, the statues up in the pediment, I suppose. Yeah, but there's a name for the triangular section. But anyway, they were all painted. They were all highly coloured. So that, and they were made to look as naturalistic as possible, so that the public could kind of see them and imagine they were actually real gods. Mm-hmm. So we'd probably find it an extremely bad taste, but that's how they liked it. Now we're heading down towards the Propylaeon, which was probably the best building in the whole site. What's interesting about them is there's no base to the capitals or the Doric columns. So basically there's an incredibly steep staircase, and the bit on the right there is impossible because you couldn't climb up and down. It is actually very steep. My understanding is it's meant to go directly down. It doesn't crank around like this. That's basically the way tourists go up now. So it was a huge flight of steps that would descend straight down directly rather than doing these dog sleds. And it was wide enough for cattle to be brought up for the slaughter. So when they were going to sacrifice animals, they would lead them directly up this huge flight of steps. There's quite a lot of evidence for the propylaeum, and that's been really well done. The statue is amazing. It's pretty amazing, yeah. There's very little evidence for what it actually looked at other than coins, but that's pretty well done. There's a statue of Nike Athena. Yeah, that's extremely well done, and there's a lot of evidence for that one, so I can understand how they could do it. That was actually, they reconstructed it from marbles that were actually reincorporated into the walls around the Acropolis, and they took the walls apart and were able to find where the stones went, and basically all the bits of the temple were there. I mean, if they got the spatial sequence right, then you could actually reconstruct a ceremony. There's lots of evidence, lots of written evidence about the procession that led from, I think it's Elefsis, which is about 30 kilometres or so away from Athens, and they would walk from Elefsis all the way to Athens, and they'd enter through the city gates, past the cemetery, and then proceed through the agora. The agora was only there because of the procession. It actually came after the procession, which dated back to the beginning of the city. And then it would proceed up the steps I was talking about into the compound of the temple. And the critically important thing was actually the cloth. There was a cloth for the statue of Athena that stood inside the Parthenon, and every year it would be replaced by a new cloth, and women would have been weaving it right through the year for that ceremony. And so if we go inside the Parthenon, you might be able to see it. So this will be the real test. So inside here there is a statue in the heart of the temple. And it's a famous statue that was made of, well, I guess a wooden framework, but then the skin was made of ivory and the clothes were made of gold. So it was an enormous, it's called chryselephantine statue of Athena. And here it is. That's pretty good. And it's the statue's ivory, you can see, it's got gold clothes. But in fact there would be a cloak that would be placed on the statue that was made of wool, woven by the women of Athens.
Welcome to the theatre of Epidaurus. First reactions?
It's too small. It's the theatre of Epidaurus is much bigger than that. It could house thousands of people. You could have a whole kind of city population in it, and it didn't have these walls at the back. It actually goes right up to the mountain. The other thing is that Epidaurus, it's inland. It's not on the coast.
So how do these discrepancies affect the sort of sense of place in this theatre?
A lot, because Epidaurus is surrounded by mountains. that's why the sanctuary's there. It's up in the mountains. And people would travel for days to get there. So they'd have to, they'd arrive by ship, but then there was actually a substantial travel from the port up into the sanctuary in the mountains.
It became something of a pilgrimage.
Yeah. It was really a health spa. People would come literally on holidays to kind of attend the sanctuary and the games.
We've spoken before about truth value. So is this a fair demonstration of a lack of truth letting down a virtual realization?
I think so. Most of Epidaurus is, a substantial amount of it is actually on a plain. And so the buildings are laid out on this really substantial plain. The theatre is then up above that plain, and it stretches way up into the mountain. It's enormously large and has incredible acoustics.
So, welcome to the Sanctuary of Delphi.
Yeah.
First impressions?
The site looks correct, except for that, go back, except for that rock, that doesn't exist.
That one just there.
The one in the background, right in front of you, that's fake. And in fact, all of that terrain in the background is fake. Delphi's got the most characteristic landscape. Basically, it's two mountains, which the sanctuary kind of goes up the middle of. The one on the left we're looking at now is actually really tall, much taller than that, so it doesn't look anything like that. And then you get this valley, really deep valley, filled with olive trees. So the clouds actually just hover above the valley below you. It really feels like you're up in with the gods. The temple, well, there's very little left of the temple, but that looks pretty well done, I'd have to say. Yeah, the ramp's correct. It's exactly like that. That's where they presumably, I don't know, lead sacrifices up, possibly. And then this bit on the right's correct. There's a high stone wall that leads along here and has offerings on it, or would have had offerings on it. So that's correct. Yeah, that's completely wrong. The stage, the proscenium, it's actually a long rectangular proscenium. It's really evident. The archaeology's there. And then the tiered seating is way too small. It's much bigger than that. It's not as big as Epidaurus, but it's bigger than that. And then above the theatre is the stadium. So let's see if they put in the stadium. They didn't. There's a huge running track, so they've left it out. I mean, that's the biggest problem, because it's one of the best preserved running tracks in Greece.
So again, this could have been improved, not just for educational value, but also for experiential value by
yeah. And the other thing is the way that a lot of people would enter Delphi was actually from the mountains. There was a pass that led down from the mountains, and they could arrive at the sanctuary from above, which you couldn't do here. But yeah, this looks like it's the entrance into the sanctuary. So turn around. It does feel a bit like that. Yeah, with all of these offerings from the different city-states either side of you as you enter. So that's not bad. And then on the right was the treasury of the Athenians. There was a water basin that was on the edge of, close to the edge of the cliff. Yeah, here it is. So you could kind of reconstruct the procession. So the water basically flows down from this ravine. But then the bit that they haven't done is there's a stone staircase cut into the side of the mountain that leads up, and that's the path that pilgrims would take. So you basically can't reconstruct the pilgrimage, which you probably don't need to do if you're just into killing people, but it wouldn't have, like, you couldn't use this for archaeological purposes.
No. So could this realisation offer context to a site visit?
Limited, because the whole point about Delphi is the procession. You know, it's a slow procession that leads up and eventually arrives at the Temple of Apollo. The whole point about them is the time that they would take. That there was a kind of ceremonial to that time. And oh, by the way, this is pretty good. See to the right, the serpent column. That was taken by Constantine to Constantinople, and it was in the centre of the Hippodrome, and it's still there. It came from here. So that's well done.
Would you ever use these virtual settings, you think, to describe the sites to your students?
I don't think it helps. Honestly, don't think it helps, because the whole point about these sites is the landscape. The temples are only here because of the landscape. That's the primary significance. And so if you get the landscape wrong, you've got the architecture wrong.
Yeah.
Having said that, the architecture is pretty well done.
So overall, how do you think the game demonstrates a sense of place within these sites?
I don't think it has one. That's the problem with it. The model is kind of instrumental. It's there to permit action to take place. It's not there to create or reconstruct a sense of place or reconstruct ceremonial. So in that sense, it's not much use in a kind of a historical or archaeological sense. There's no time built into this model. Because the whole point about it was things happened at certain times of the day because of the natural light, and they finished after a certain period, and then other things would happen. For example, the feasting would happen in the evening when the sun's setting, for obvious reasons. The theatrical plays could only happen during daytime. So it's kind of times built into the whole life of the place. So if you were going to make it archaeologically or even historically correct, you've got to build time into it.